Stop Funding Israel News with your host, Steve Johnson, and special reporter, JB in the field.
In the news this evening, militiamen in El Paso bust a CIA covert drug smuggling operation. Israeli Defense Force veterans admit they were ordered to target civilians in Gaza. The Bali 9 barrister exposes the Australian Federal Police as being complicit in their executions. The Australian government is considering plans to sell immigration rights to people. If you've got the money, you can be a citizen of Australia. This plan should outrage every single Australian. All these stories and more on Stop Funding Israel News. Billionaire scumbag David Rockefeller gets his 6th heart transplant from a live human at age 99. Just a sample of what we've got in store for you tonight. All these stories and many more on Stop Funding Israel News. And now your host, Steve Johnson. Welcome back there, Forum. Great to have your company once again. The leading story tonight is a group of Minutemen watching the Mexican border for illegal migrants and drug traffickers have proceeded to make the citizen's arrest of 2 men in a black SUV carrying over 1,300 pounds of cocaine. High-grade stuff. The volunteers were completely astonished when the 2 arrestees pulled out CIA cards and explained that they are actually carrying the drug as part of their duties and that the cargo belonged to the CIA themselves. Here's more on that story. The entire incident took place in the evening of the 22nd of April 2015 in the Chihuahuan Desert near the Texan city of El Paso. A group of 7 Minutemen saw a large black SUV drive rapidly across the border, and they chased the vehicle with their own truck and stopped it after a chase of over 15 miles. The militias arrested the 2 men on board and called the Border Patrol, who proceeded to search the vehicle when they discovered dozens of packages of cocaine, totaling an incredible 618 kilograms, or 1,363 pounds. The 2 men trying to get away then produced identity cards to validate their claim, saying that they were CIA and they were part of a drug operation based on the agency. However, a CIA spokesperson, Dean Boyd, has officially denied any link between the organization and the 2 men. Dean Boyd saying the CIA doesn't take part in drug smuggling operations at the U.S.-Mexican border. Yeah, right. And I do not know for now if the men are actually affiliated to the agency in any way, but I can tell you the cocaine doesn't belong to the CIA. Both the Border Patrol officers and the Minutemen seemed unconvinced. However, many of them have seemed to believe that the Secret Service agency is hiding something. The U.S. Customs Service have announced a thorough investigation to try and verify the 2 men's stories. Apparently, they even had valid accreditations to the CIA and a receipt for their cargo, says Sean Francis Miller, a spokesperson for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection for El Paso. And he said, "What kind of drug dealer in his right mind demands a receipt for 1,300 pounds of cocaine? There is really something strange about these guys, and we believe the CIA possibly knows more than it's ready to admit." The 2 men, however, remain under the custody of the Customs Service at the moment and are still being interrogated in a facility near El Paso. They are facing charges of possession, trafficking, and importing illegal drugs and could face other criminal charges once the investigation is over. Both the FBI and the DEA have announced that they would collaborate with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection on this case, which has already attracted a lot of attention in South Texas. The cocaine itself was all packaged neatly and marked with the symbol of a Sinaloa cartel representing the Black Scorpion. We're going to stay abreast of this story and keep you updated when more information comes to hand. And on to our next story about David Rockefeller getting a heart transplant at age 99. Apparently his 6th heart transplant in his whole diseased life. Well, guess what? It's impossible. This satanic fucker never had a heart to begin with. It's impossible for him to get a heart transplant because he just simply doesn't have a heart. Never had one. Despite how much of a creepy vampire he actually looks like, this is actually a fake news story. And many researchers and truthers have bought into it completely. A lot of websites have bought into it, and a lot of people have been talking about it. probably because it's entirely feasible that this would indeed be true. It does sound like something that this motherfucker would do, use up live hearts of live people and unwilling victims to extend his own horrid life. But it's impossible. This guy hasn't had a heart, so he can't get a heart transplant to begin with. This story is unfortunately satire and a fake. On to our next story. West Virginia residents have filed a federal lawsuit against DuPont for years-long contamination of drinking water. A federal lawsuit has been filed against the chemical company DuPont by residents of West Virginia after being poisoned for many years with a chemical called C8. The plaintiffs seek damages from DuPont for contaminating their local drinking water. Now, DuPont, a chemical bastard company, has had a habit of poisoning people, as many chemical companies do. The company has been sued hundreds of times for contamination of both the environment and mankind. The chemical C8 is used to make the product Teflon, which can cause liver, prostate, and testicular cancer. DuPont were highly aware of this danger for a long time, but continue to use it anyway in the manufacturing of products. As early as the 1950s, DuPont knew how dangerous C8 would be to human beings in the name of profit. White-collar criminals decided just to ignore the facts. DuPont have been dumping C8 chemicals into 2 local aquifers, whereupon West Virginia residents have been drinking this poison water for many, many years. And DuPont even knew since the 1980s that the chemical water was causing local birth defects and could have acted then, but chose to do nothing. Another company, 3M, who was using Teflon, even told DuPont that they didn't want to use their product anymore due to the dangers it posed to public health. Most notable of the non-stick cookware dangers, chemical compounds known as perfluorinated compounds also emitted from using this cookware. Once the compounds become heated, they are considered to be very potentially deadly, now if the vapor gas is taken in too quickly. DuPont continues, despite the lawsuits, DuPont continues to sell their cancer-causing chemicals even to this day. It seems that they just don't know what's good for them. They know what's good for us because they keep feeding it to us and we keep buying it from them. We need to stop these companies like Monsanto, DuPont, Bayer, GlaxoSmithKline, all the chemical companies that have been poisoning us over the years with their slow kill chemicals. But right about now, we're going to cut to JB in the field with another fantastic story that's happening and breaking right now in Australia. Over to you, Mr. JB in the field.
Thank you, Steve. We've got a very important news story that every Australian should give a damn about. Whether our government gives a damn whether we live or die. Federal police imported the death penalty into Australia when they arranged for the Bali 9 to be arrested in Indonesia, according to Bob Myers, the barrister who tipped them. He states the Australian Federal Police had all the evidence they needed to arrest the 9 before they left Australia on a heroin smuggling mission. Instead, the AFP let them travel to Bali and then told Indonesian police about the crime they were about to commit, Mr. Myers says, basically sending them to their inevitable executions. Bali 9 ringleaders Andrew Chan and Morian Sukumaran are now dead because the AFP betrayed their obligation not to expose Australians to the death penalty, he says. They effectively imported the death penalty into Australian law by acting the way they did, Mr. Myers told ABC Radio on Monday the 4th of May. But Mr. Myers says he won't get the one answer he really wants, and that's simply why. There's not an answer. They're going to try and say to curry favour with the Indonesians, cooperation in the terms of security and terrorism, or alternatively sending a message to other young Australian kids. Not one of these is a sufficient answer. Mr. Myers said that when he went to Bali in the wake of the arrests a decade ago, AFP officer Paul Hunniford told him it was virtually inevitable that one or more of them was going to die. The barrister called Mr. Hunniford, who was the AFP senior liaison officer in Bali at the time, the author of the men's death warrants. It was Mr. Hunniford who wrote to Indonesian police to provide the Bali 9's names, passport numbers and details of what they were planning. Bob Myers is a friend of Bali 9 drug mule Scott Rush, who's serving a life sentence for his role in the heroin ring. He tipped off the AFP about the drug plot. after his friend Scott Rush's father, Lee, called him, desperate for help to head off a crime he feared his son was about to commit. Opposition leader Bill Shorten says he wants to know if changes to the way Australian police handle potential death penalty cases overseas are sufficient. It seems we're dealing with an Australian police agency that doesn't give a rat's ass if Australians are executed or not. This is JB in the field for Stop Funding Israel News. Back to you, Steve.
Hey, thanks very much there, JB in the field. Great to hear your story. On to our next story now. Some 2,220 Palestinians were killed, most of whom were civilians, including many women and children during last year's genocidal Israeli killing spree in Gaza. On the Israeli side, just 66 personnel were killed. And now, a non-governmental organization called Breaking the Silence has spent 8 months after Operation Protective Edge and has just ended interviewing more than 60 Israeli servicemen from the IDF, including the Army, Navy, and Air Force, up to the rank of Major. The result is a damning 237-page report. The IDF were ordered to, and I quote, fire at every person you see during the Gaza war, or I should say conflict, while civilian areas were deliberately targeted with inaccurate weapons, according to the Israeli group Breaking the Silence. The testimonies gathered by Breaking the Silence includes the acts of individual soldiers who shot civilians dead and of lethal decisions being made at the top of the Israeli military, where other courses of action could have been taken. The report found that the soldiers were briefed that any person in the combat zone should be considered an enemy. The soldiers were told by their commanders to fire at every person they identified in a combat zone, since the working assumption was that every person in Gaza was an enemy. One soldier said, "The only rules of engagement that were given to us was not to fire at our own forces." Well, duh. From the very start they told us, shoot to kill. As far as the IDF was concerned, there wasn't supposed to be any civilian population there, he said. Another soldier said they assumed that once leaflets had been dropped on Gaza warning of the imminent attack, the only people left would be militants. Therefore, it was okay for them. Go figure. The Gaza Strip is one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. It's the world's largest, biggest outdoor prison. It measures just 40 kilometers by 10 kilometers, yet has a population of over 1.8 million people. During the Gaza conflict, which began on July the 8th, 2014, and lasted for 7 weeks, the crossings to Gaza into Israel and Egypt were closed. Breaking the Silence now believes its findings warrant an independent investigation into this conflict. For its part, the Israeli Defense Force had been releasing a statement saying it's committed to properly investigating all credible claims, but that Breaking the Silence have been refused to provide the IDF with any proof of their claims. Internal investigations into the war have been launched by the IDF, but nothing has come out telling the truth. The chief of Israel's armed forces during Operation Protective Edge, Benny Gantz, declined to comment, no surprises there, on the Breaking the Silence report, but defended his soldiers' actions and warned that any future conflict would be bloodier because of the difficulty in distinguishing between Palestinian fighters and civilians. What an excuse. It seems that Israel just never knows when to stop its killing spree, as they continue on to this day, treating Gazans like animals, even worse, slaughtering them without any forethought. Well, we got one more story coming up right now on Stop Funding Israel News, and that will be the wrap-up of this week's news. As we're going to cross live again once more to JB in the field with his breaking news story about the Australian government. JB, are you there?
Yep, I'm right here, Steve. Thanks, mate. Well, just when you thought it was impossible for the Australian government to flog off anything else Australian, they seem to have found one more thing: basic citizenship and the right to immigrate. Under radical new proposals, migrants will no longer be accepted based on their skills or family connections. The Productivity Commission is investigating a price-based immigration system that would use entry fees as the only determination for who gains entry into Australia. All this boils down is a potential way for the federal government to bring in billions of dollars and easily sack thousands of immigration public service jobs at the same time. Unions and business groups have stated skills shortages should remain the focus of Australia's immigration policy, And ethnic community groups say they would oppose any moves that would prevent poorer immigrants from reuniting with their families. The Productivity Commission paper on Australia's migrant intake, released on Friday, raises some dramatic proposals, including introducing an immigration lottery and creating a HEX-style payment system for immigrants to pay back their entry fees. In its paper, the Productivity Commission canvasses two options to introduce an immigration fee: setting a price with the size of the intake dictated by demand, or setting a cap on the intake and allowing demand to dictate the price of entry. The inability of many hopeful immigrants to pay up front could be addressed by allowing them to borrow against future expected earnings, or by introducing a loans program. No forethought has been mentioned how this will impact an already oversaturated employment market in Australia. The Commission notes that introducing a price-based system could lead to some loss of government control over Australia's immigrant intake and could change the composition of those who apply to migrate to Australia. Refugees have been exempted and would not have to pay the fee. One economist, Gary Becker, who supports the idea, has suggested setting the fee to immigrate at, get this, $50,000 per person. This would make a substantial financial contribution to the Australian budget, and I hope that would lead to lower taxes, he said, as if. Businesses needing skilled migrants could pay for the fee, or governments could waive the fee for particular professions or trades, he said. Immigration Minister Peter Dutton said the proposals were not government policy when releasing the inquiry's terms of reference earlier this year. Australian Council of Trade Unions President Jed Kearney said, "We're concerned the Productivity Commission's inquiry is focused on allowing those rich enough to migrate regardless of fulfilling the current requirements, including filling skill shortages." The Productivity Commission will release a draft report in November and hold public hearings before it hands its final report to the government next March. This is JB, live in the field, reporting for Stop Funding Israel News. Thank you, Steve.
Just a quick question there, JB. How do you think this will affect the rent prices in Australia, which are already at record prices?
Well, it looks like we'll only be having the wealthy come to Australia, and they're wanting to settle at a $15,000 investment. So, yeah, obviously this will drive up housing prices and the cost of living.
And of course it will drive up the prices of basic staples like food and gas, right?
Pretty much everything. You were going to have a demand increase in these things, and with people that are going to be able to pay. So of course this is going to drive up the cost of living, as was experienced in WA with the mining boom.
Thanks very much for your reporting there, JB in the field. Take care until next time.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, thanks for that great info, JB in the field. Some very disturbing events taking shape in the Zionist-occupied country of Australia, that's for sure. Well, thanks to everybody for tuning in, especially my new subscribers. I hope you enjoyed this episode just as much as I do. Please do like the video, share it with your friends, download it and share it with your neighbors. Leave a comment down below and stay tuned for the next news episode when it comes out with more amazing stories from this crazy-ass world of Babylon. That's all for me for now. Take care, God bless, and ciao for now.